There are lots of theories of how the self is formed, how we individuate, how we differentiate. And I'm not trained in psychology other than through my own investigation, and I've been in a couple seminaries where we studied that. So this is, again, from my own perspective, and I think it tracks both my own practice and working with students. And this comes from a psychologist, Margaret Mahler, called Dual Unity, and some others. She was the lead person. But essentially, it's that an infant is born into what's characterized as dual unity. The baby sees the unity, feels the unity, doesn't understand that they're separate. They feel that they're part of the whole. The caregivers are part of the whole. Everything's that unity. And it's called dual unity because there is a caregiver, and the caregiver's perception, of course, is of duality. And so the infant, for that period of time, believes themselves just to be part of the oneness. They don't think of themselves or consider themselves separate. But as they get older and they encounter hunger, a need for a fresh diaper, affection, whatever it is they need, they rely on the caregivers to provide it. And so the baby at some point begins to cognize that the hunger's in here, the need for a diaper, affection is inside, and the solution is outside. And this begins to break down the dual unity. They realize that there's a duality. And in this process, part of what the infant does is the infant turns away from the unity. And this unity is a unity with the presence and love of the Absolute. And so the baby is turning away from the undivided wholeness of the Absolute and landing in their birth family or relationship with caregivers. And that includes society as well. And interestingly, virtually all of the infants, all the children, take the blame for this turn away. And the child positions it, we each position it, that something is wrong with me, that the Absolute kicked me out. I was rejected, and the conclusion is, I'm terribly flawed. There's a core wound in me that's so broken that the Absolute said, nope, not you, out. And again, we all made that choice. We chose the family, we chose the caregivers over this unity. And the unity the baby experiences is not the same as an awakeness. Because for us, we've come from a firm belief in the personality and the self-structure as who we are. I'm this separate being, I have these needs, all that. And the infant doesn't have that. So even though they're in a unity, it's not an awakened unity. They didn't awaken from the belief in a separate self. They just were born into it. So it's a little different for them than for us. And the story that the child develops over some time, again, is that something in me is very, very broken. And this is the core wound. And the core wound is different. It's not, we don't have all the same story. The stories that I've heard are, I'm unlovable, I'm bad, I'm broken, I'm worthless, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, and the list goes on. But it comes down to a firm belief that we have this broken piece in us, this place where we feel a worthlessness. And as the child develops, it begins to build a personality based on the mirroring that it receives from the adults. So for most of us, when the adults like what we do, good job, good baby, good boy, good girl, we're like, oh, great. They like me, they're going to keep me around. And so we begin to act in ways that get their approval. And this begins the structuring of personality in terms of how we see ourselves, how we operate. It's in part based on feedback. It's in part based on self-perception. And then it all kind of gels at some point into, this is me. And part of the strategy of establishing this me, this sense of self, is that we want to distract ourselves and others from the core wound. Because we feel if others see this, they're going to reject me the same way the Absolute did. I'm going to get thrown out. So I've got to really not let anybody know that this is here. And this becomes a lot of our life and all the distractions we have. If you look at most of our entertainment, even advertising, most of it is pointing to things that we can do to not feel the core wound. All the ways we can feel good, feel busy, feel engaged. And that's just how it works. And yet, as we start a spiritual practice, we begin peeling back the layers by sitting in stillness, by orienting to qualities of the Absolute. We begin to see the conditioned world and the unconditioned world. And we begin to get that, oh, okay, this conditioned world is hinged on things like personality and a separate self. And so that starts our journey of looking to see what's happening there. And so part of the process, as I mentioned earlier in this week, is that in the process of awakening, one of the experiences is something I call absence of self, or traditionally is called no self in Buddhism. And this is where the perception of a self becomes transparent. The sense of self isn't perceived. And all the markers, all the ways we know ourselves, our likes and dislikes, our habituated thinking. A lot of people have an ongoing narration of life, identifying all the things they like and don't like, all the relationships they have just as a reinforcement of who they are. And so when we're in absence of self, this slows down, if not stops, because it doesn't have the driver running. But the core wound is challenging to work. It takes a long time to get to the core wound. It's not something that will work in this retreat. It takes years to get to. But we can start by orienting with shikantaza. We can orient in the guided meditations to the Absolute. And we can begin to land more in the Absolute and rest more there. And being in the Absolute, particularly in the unmanifest, the absence, the peace, the stillness, quiets the psychological material, the sense of self, the stories, all of that begins to quiet down. And when it quiets down, we begin to see pieces of ourself. We begin to recognize that there are aspects of us that are no longer current. That's not part of who we are anymore. It's habituated behavior that's just continued. And so we can begin to make some changes right away. We can see, oh, I don't like doing this anymore. I'm not wired to do that. So we can begin to live more wholesomely. And in Buddhism, we use the precepts for that also. I've said before, I use the three pure precepts: do good, cease from evil, do good for others, as probably my primary lens that I look at life and decide to take action. I'm looking particularly for what's good for others. If it's something that's beneficial to me and it benefits others, then that tends to be a good decision. And so, again, I mentioned earlier also about watching our behavior in life, looking for overreactions, looking for disproportionate reactions that often will point us to areas where we can work, areas that are ready, places we can examine and update, hopefully. And so that's part of the sort of personality workings, the upgrading of personality that happens in this practice. it doesn't happen much on retreat. This is more kind of day-to-day practice. But I mention it because you will have insights, you will see into behaviors, you will unplug some of those behaviors. The sense of self is probably going to change on this retreat in ways that we don't know yet. But there'll be places you'll see, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't have that need. I don't have that fear. I don't have whatever the motivator is. And interestingly, we all long for the absence of self and awakening experience. And yet, interestingly, when the self is quiet, when it's transparent, people can feel a sense of loss. They can feel like something's missing. Some people report feeling helpless or hopeless. I don't know. It's like the rudder on the ship is gone. I don't know how to direct. I don't know where I should be going. And so it gives them a sense of loss. Even people can struggle with a little bit of sadness or mild depression. It's just a change. The self is gone, and this has been the leading feature since we can remember. And around this time, as the self becomes transparent, or we're experiencing absence of self, no self, when we're back in the personality, it begins to feel uncomfortable. It's like a suit of clothes that have gotten too small. We feel uncomfortable. We feel like we're being put into something that's too small, too rigid, too narrow. And so we start finding ways to push back on that, to experience life in a fresher way. And a lot of this comes down to being open and looking at possibilities. We all have habituated behaviors. Those of you that drink coffee, you probably have a way you drink coffee every morning, and this is just how I do it, how I like it, and all that. And part of the spiritual journey is questioning these things. When you go to have your coffee, how do I want it today? Every decision is a fresh decision. And this is part of how you start figuring out who you are without this personality being the driver. You start seeing, well, how do I feel today? I had somebody who reported some behavior they changed that they had been doing since they were a child. And it was really humorous because they did, I can't remember what it was now, but they said part of what their realization was they didn't even actually like the food or drink that they were engaging with. They did it because they thought they should. And it was this great liberation for them. They said, and I don't even like doing it. But it was just so habituated into their personality that they didn't question it. So part of the invitation for you is on retreat here to really start bringing a freshness. Don't assume you know what you want or need. Check in. What do I need right now? We're on a break. Should I walk? Should I rest? Should I sit outside? Should I meditate? Being fresh, being open, not knowing. And part of our journey here in the territory before and around First Awakening is this questioning, is this looking at what we're doing, trying to figure out what's congruent now. Who am I today? What do I want? And I mentioned that in the course of the progression of realization with the Kensho, the personality will be transparent. It will be absent for a period of time, which could be minutes, could be hours, weeks, or even months. But eventually the personality comes back, maybe not in the exact same strength or form, but it does come back. And almost all of us think it's not going to. We think we're done, this is great, when it comes back, there can be some disappointment. But it gives us something to work with. And that's what deepens our realization. That's what leads to further Kensho, further deepening of realization of the absolute. And so we're constantly doing both. We're working the transcendent, we're journeying to the absolute, steeping in that, getting more and more familiar, more comfortable, more trusting. And at the same time, we're watching our behavior. What am I doing that doesn't fit anymore? How do I want to live my life? And this prepares us as the realizations deepen to start letting go of aspects of us that aren't wholesome, that aren't supporting realization. And so our lives begin to function better too. And usually around this time, if people do the ceremony in the Zen tradition of Jukai, receiving the precepts really lets them take on the precepts as a guide for living. And so that helps also in terms of our behavior, our choices, all of that. Because we want our behavior to ideally match our realization. We want our outside to match our inside. And that becomes our journey, is how do we do it? So we're cultivating the open spaciousness, the vastness of the Absolute. We're cultivating the unity aspect of the manifest Absolute, the love and presence. We do this developing innate goodness. And really, one of the most crucial practices is cultivating not knowing, recognizing we don't know a lot. And we have to be very comfortable with that, and that takes time because we're used to knowing. In our societies, someone who doesn't know isn't looked on favorably. But in the spiritual world, it's a great benefit to not know. Because when you don't know, every possibility is available. As soon as you know, you've narrowed the field down to a few choices. One of the practices that we can do, which we're going to start doing in this group, is I've called I Am Not. And those of you that have read some of my books have seen this practice. And this is a practice I started when I was doing the 2-month retreat with the Sayadaw and doing the jhana retreat. And I found that repeating these I am not phrases really helped loosen the attachment of the sense of self. And I'll just go through these now, but we'll start practicing this at the start of some of the meditations. I am not this appearance. I am not this body. I am not these thoughts. I am not this life history. I am not these behaviors. I am not these emotions. I am not these memories. I am not this self-identity. I am not anything. So you can see it invites us to unhook from lots of places that almost all of these are ways that we support the sense of self. So we're loosening that connection to that. And so, as I said, we'll start doing this. I'll leave this down here and we'll do it as a call and response. Let me just pause here and see if there's any questions. I've said quite a lot in a short time.